Hi guys, I'd like to talk to you about the difference between hand-wound pickups and machine-wound pickups. This isn't a this is better than this sort of video. Everything's great, it just depends on the sound you're looking for. Before we get into that though, we should really dispel some myths about pickups and DC resistance numbers and how that relates to output. The way it relates to output is not at all. You've probably at some point heard somebody say that a pickup with a higher DC resistance number has more output than one with a smaller number. This isn't true. They do not correlate. The one thing you can keep in mind, though, is that pickups that have higher DC resistance will tend to be darker sounding pickups. The reason they aren't related is that many factors determine output. So, for example, if I had a pickup that had thinner wire and it was wound with a certain amount of winds, let's say 5,000 or something, and instead I wound that pickup with fatter wire that resists less, it would have a lower resistance number, right? Because it's resisting the electrical flow less, but it would have big output still, right? So let's say we now have a pickup that has the same output, but it's very bright now. So these things the output can be changed and tone can be changed by a variety of factors. You know, the type of magnet, right? The strength of the magnet, shape of the magnet, the pole pieces, you know, whether you have Philister head, slug heads, hex heads, double row of screws. These are all things that affect that. So those things don't correlate. Probably where the myth started is that if you were to take a vintage PAF pickup and wind it a little hotter, a few more winds, because it's exactly the same design, right? Everything being equal, same design, more winds of copper, then you have higher output. So that's the only way that would correlate. If you could guarantee that these two pickups are the same design and this one has more winds of copper, then it's going to be higher output. But there's so many different ways to construct pickups that you can't compare them that way. The other thing too is that output is largely perception, right? So let's say you took a high-powered DiMarzio pickup. Well, because of the way that's wound, it's going to be voiced very dark and very focused in the mid-range, right? And so that's going to probably, if you play it through a clean channel, make the amp distort, right? But it's not going to sound very dynamic, right? So the amp is reading it as loud because it's distorting, but you're hearing it be not very dynamic and being very compressed and going, it doesn't sound that loud. Whereas if you took a low output PAF pickup, which has lots of treble, not a lot of mids, some bass, it would sound, it wouldn't distort the amp, but it would sound very dynamic because it would go loud to soft and really yell at you, right, when you hit the guitar. So you would perceive that as being loud, even though the amp doesn't really see it as loud. So a lot of this is perception. So you really have to just do some research on the sound you want and how that relates to feeling loud or dynamic or compressed, depending on what you're going for. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, what is a hand-wound pickup? A hand-wound pickup is not generally a pickup that is wound completely by hand. It's kind of hard to control the wind that way. There are a few guys that do that, but generally no. Generally what that means is, instead of a machine-wound pickup, where the wire feeds off of a spool and goes onto a bobbin, right, that's computer programmed to do a certain amount of wraps for a certain resistance, which will give you a nice tight wind, right, very uniform. A hand-wound pickup is a human is actually guiding the wire, and they can control the path of the wire, how it winds on the bobbin. They can also control the tension, which directly relates to the capacitance internally in the pickup, and also the resistance number, which will have definite impact on feel and tone. So hand-wound, is hand-wound the same as scatterwound? No, not necessarily. Scatterwinding of a pickup basically is intended to hand guide the wire so that it crisscrosses instead of making a nice tight spool like that on the bobbin. This is intended to mimic the early Gibson Lissona winding machines that wound the original PAFs, were fairly erratic and did different sort of patterns like that. So as people kind of analyze the pickups and figure out why the PAF sounded so magical, that's a big determining factor. So a lot of modern winders are mimicking that pattern, and then once you understand that, different winders probably have a different approach to that pattern and how much tension they're putting on it, and that's responsible for the slightly different sounds and feels of different manufacturers that make scatterwound pickups. So that's the thing. You don't have to hand wind a pickup and have it be scatterwound, right? You could hand wind a pickup and pull it really tight, lots of tension, really tight wind, really uniform, or you could have it be more erratic. Okay, so the question is, why would we want a scatterwound pickup, right? What does it do? Wouldn't you rather have a more uniform pickup, right? So the thing is, it's very difficult for a machine to actually do this sort of pattern and control a looser tension consistently, right? So it's actually easier for a human to feel that and regulate it, right? It's harder for machines to do that. Now, by having the looser wind, what happens is you're able to have output, let's say, decoupled from compression, right? So I used to be a big DiMarzio fan. I still think they're a great company. But what I started to notice is that the DiMarzios would feel more compressed, along with other purely machine wound modern mass-produced pickups. They'd have more compression and sound more congested and more mid-range focused as the output went up. The bare knuckles that I'm using now have the opposite quality. They sound very open. The power is spread across the full frequency range, so it doesn't oversaturate or congest the amp. It allows the amp to shine through because it'll still push the amp, right? But it's not adding compression. So to me, the scatterwound pickups has this feeling of still being very dynamic when they have output, and they don't get, and because of that, they have a lot of clarity to them. So why would that be valuable? Well, on traditional machine wound pickups, in order to get clarity, we've got to start going to like maybe hex heads, you know, on the pole pieces, and we've got to go to ceramic magnets, and you'll start to get the clarity with the output, but it tends to start to sound sterile because of that, and have a harshness to it. Also, like active pickups, maybe you go to an active circuit, and that gets you that sort of thing. Well, with the scatterwinding techniques, you can maintain the clarity, but without a harshness. So they have a silkiness to it that's almost like very smooth, and the attack is very clean. It's not gritty or squishy, and it's really cool. Now for me, that's very good because I'm using it with a KSR Artemis amp, which is a very thick Soldano-y Mark II-C sort of amp. So I don't want to overly push the amp and congest the amp. I want to let the amp shine. And so for me, that sort of design of the scatterwinding thing was a big revelation that it allows the amp to open up. The other thing that a lot of these companies are doing that are doing hand-wound pickups is they're really staying true to vintage components, regardless of what the design is. So bare knuckle, for example, there's sort of like a DiMarzio in the sense that while they make some classic pickups, they make a lot of problem solver pickups that could be a pickup that maybe you need a more modern voiced pickup, or you need a pickup that's darker on the high end or brighter, or whatever. It helps you fix a problem that you need for your particular guitar, your playing style. However, unlike DiMarzio or a Seymour Duncan that might use conventional standard, let's say Alnico 5 magnets and standard sort of pole pieces, bare knuckle and a lot of the other boutique hand scatterwinders sort of believe that regardless of what the philosophy of the sound of the pickup you're trying to create, that the old metallurgy of everything, right? So for example, what the makeup of the magnet is, how you cut it, how you sand it, whether or not you sand it smooth, what the metallurgy of the pole pieces, all that stuff, that needs to be exact because it imparts a certain classic silky sort of response to the tone. Steve Blucher, who would be the designer of DiMarzio, sort of feels that you can create that effect using normal modern materials, and you don't need to get into, I don't know, heavy form wire or whatever you want to get into that's a vintage thing. I can see both points of views. However, in trying DiMarzio pickups that try to mimic what the bare knuckle sort of stuff does, they don't quite get there. And they're, as much as I wanted to say that it's all snake oil, there is something to the fact that doing the vintage materials does have a very open, clear, silky and clear without being harsh sort of thing there. So I think if you want that, you really should try it out. Anyway, so what are some of the pluses and minuses to hand wound versus machine wound? Okay, so the pluses of the scatter winding we just talked about. I think it's more dynamic. It allows the amp to speak more. It's clearer, right? What are some of the minuses of that? Well, if you're not a good player, you may be disappointed with hearing what your playing actually sounds like, because it's very dynamic. So you make a mistake, it yells at you, right? The other thing is if your guitar is inferior or your amp isn't good, it's going to allow the amp to shine and allow the amp to do the heavy lifting. That can be a minus if you have an amp that's a thinner sounding amp. A modern machine wound pickup is going to push it more in the mid-range, which is going to help thicken the amp up and sort of blur or blend your playing more so that if you're a little messy or the amp's a little harsh, that it makes it sound a little smoother. This can sometimes also like modern pickups have more compression, right? A Machinewound pickup. So this may help even out your playing for you. The other thing that can do is give the impression of sounding fatter and punchier. And that was something I went back and forth with a little bit between bare knuckles and DiMarzio's a little bit, swapping them in and out several times in the same guitar to really figure this out. At first, the DiMarzio would sound fatter, and the bare knuckle would sound thinner, but then I realized what was going on is traditional Machinewound pickup, as it gets higher, medium to upper output, it's getting more congested, and it's getting darker and darker, and it's funneling its power, its push, its output into more of the mid-range frequencies. So if you have a really thick amp and it's already, the guitar's a mid-range instrument, it's distorting mid-range frequencies. So the DiMarzio is pushing and overdriving the heck out of those frequencies more. So that's pushing it more forwards in your face, and it feels like it's punchier. But then you start to realize, no, it's actually sort of more blurred and smeared, right, is what's going on there, and it's overdriving the amp more. What you realize going back to a more vintage style pickup with scatter winding is that it's not going to overly push any particular frequency, but that means it allows the amp to be open. So you can increase the gain on the amp, you can use more of the voicing, and the pickup gets out of the way and lets the amp do the work. This is great if you have an amp that rewards you for doing that. So you really have to decide what kind of amp you want to do that with. I found that I probably would like a DiMarzio better with a thin sort of Marshall, because I don't want to actually hear what that amp sounds like as realistically. I don't want to hear the gain structure as realistically. I want the pickup to push it and fix the problem and add compression that can't be there in the amp. So it depends on what you want. Now the other thing to keep in mind are some potential issues with a pickup that's more sensitive, like the bare knuckle stuff, or really anything that's scatterwound. I should note that the guitars I use, the Shelly guitars, because of the way Peter builds them and certain design structures that I'm not going to divulge, these guitars are probably like the most resonant guitars I've ever played, including Suhrs. The Suhrs get a runner-up status, okay, because they're very resonant. But this caused some issues, because what you have to think about is the scatterwound pickup is hearing a wider range of frequencies rather than funneling it all into one, like mid-range band. So it's hearing more of the wood of the guitar, high to low. And if you're running on a really high gain amp like the KSR, which has 5 gain stages, if the guitar is very resonant and you're hearing the body more, it's got potential to be more microphonic if things aren't just right. For example, I had some issues with some neck pickups that were squealing. Okay, part of this issue is, the pickups, the bare knuckles, for example, come off the boat, or off the plane from England, right? Well, I started to learn that when you leave a pickup like in the customs office in New York for a month, when it gets stuck there in the summer, this can have problems where the wax potting melts and moves, and the coil moves a little, and it becomes microphonic. This would happen with any pickup if that's done to it like that. So I had some issues with that fact that the pickups are more sensitive, the potting moved a little bit, and the guitar is super duper resonant, and then resonant, and then the neck pickup squeals like crazy. I should note that the bare knuckle guys were great. They re-potted the pickup, no problems. But that's something you have to consider, is that the pickups will hear more of the guitar they're in. They'll capture more of the wood tone of the guitar and more of your hands and everything. So you have to determine if that's what you want or not. They're also more sensitive to mounting methods. So like the pickup will definitely sound markedly different, mounted in a pickup ring versus like, Van Halen style, right? Bolted directly, screwed directly into the body of the guitar. That will be a more dramatic difference. So you may like that, or you may be annoyed that, if you didn't want the pickup to hear that much more body tone by bolting it into the guitar, but you like the look of that, you might be annoyed by that fact. A machine-wound pickup picks up less of the subtleties of the instrument. You're hearing more pickup with guitar, right, with a machine-wound pickup. With a hand-wound pickup that's scatter-wound especially, you're hearing a blend of the guitar and the pickup. The guitar sort of sound is always in there. So you have to determine if that's really what you want, and how sensitive you want, and how dynamic you want the pickup to be. The only way you can try this is by trying it. Anyway, so of the pickups I've tried various DiMarzios. I used to be an air zone guy. I tried some Surs. I liked those. I didn't find them. They did sound a little more magical in some ways than some of the DiMargios. They were a little bass heavy to me, a little woofy. I found that the Sur pickups seemed to sound best in Sur guitars to me. You know, duh, right? And then I, tried a bunch of bare knuckles, and I'm currently using the Holy Divers in both of the guitars, and they work good. They have a lot of what I liked about the fatness and the dynamics of the air zone, but just more dynamic and more balanced. And the attack is so much nicer. The air zones, still had a lot more compression than these do, and the attack would be sort of squishy, right? These have a nice, clear, silky attack without being harsh or gritty in any way, and being super dynamic and also like warm and smooth. So I've found a really good setup there that works for me. But you really just have to try it and see what works for you and what company's philosophy you like the idea of. And don't get hung up on, oh my gosh, the Handwound pickups cost a little bit more. Okay, so they cost 50, 60 bucks more. But if it makes the guitar work and do what you want it to do, it's kind of stupid not to go that route. If you don't end up liking it, most of these companies are nice enough to let you swap it out for another one, or you can flip these pickups very easily. You can get your money back. It's no big deal. Anyway, those are the differences between the pickups, and really just try some things out and figure out what works for you. I hope I helped you out. If you liked the video, please subscribe so you can keep up to date with other things I do in the future. Thank you.